Guys, when you picture a grandma, especially an Italian grandmother, right? You picture this very maternal, older woman cooking in the kitchen, talking to you sweet and knitting or baking. And I didn't necessarily have that with my maternal grandmother. Rose was a pistol whip. She would be mad at me even if I said her name on this podcast because everything was a secret. You couldn't talk about the family. This is how Italians are. Nothing, you can't say what goes on in this house. That's what Italians will drill into your head. Cawfee Talk. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Cawfee Talk with Tara. I feel like I have the accent more. I did this last time. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Cawfee Talk with Tara Cannistraci. I hope you're having a great day. I'm so conscious of my accent now. It's like crazy, especially because I'm trying to be like radio and energized. But sometimes when I just start talking organically, I feel like it comes out more, and I'm like not consciously thinking of how I should be sounding. Okay. Anyway, guys, you already know what I sound like, especially if you're listening to this podcast. If you're watching it, if you follow me, you know that this is the voice that you get every week. Speaking of, where did it come from? Where did I come from? I wanted to give you guys a little background, some history about me, because I know I've talked about dribs and drabs here and there. I did come from divorced parents. My dad was an alcoholic, is an alcoholic, even though he's sober. And I wanted to talk. I've been lately, it's so funny because we say that comedy is tragedy over time. And lately, maybe it was too hard for me a few years ago or 10 years ago. But lately, I've been telling stories about how I grew up. And in particular, stories about my grandmother. My grandmother, Rose Pagano. She would be mad at me even if I said her name on this podcast because everything was a secret. You couldn't talk about the family. This is how Italians are. Nothing, you can't say what goes on in this house. That's what Italians will drill into your head. And I do feel some sort of protectiveness over her to even talk about her. And I think that's why for so many years I didn't talk about her on stage and I never said her name because I always felt she would be embarrassed because she had gotten dementia. And I was very protective of her with that, even introducing her to people after a certain point because I felt so loyal to her. I knew she wouldn't want anybody to know. It was like we even had to keep it a secret. Like what pains me was that she knew she was getting it and she was getting very defensive about it because she didn't want anybody to know. Breaks my heart. Really, I'm not trying to make you guys get down this morning, but it's the reality, and sadly, a lot of us face it with relatives. Anyway, my grandmother was this like Spitfire personality, and she had a sense of humor. Almost everybody in my family, and maybe that's where I get it from, very quick-witted. My father is so sharp. He's so funny. He's so quick. My mother's pretty quick too. And so was my grandmother. My grandfather was always telling like dad jokes, like the street jokes, like, like a guy walks into a bar. My grandfather, you ran into my grandfather, Rudy Pagano. He always had a joke like that. But my grandmother was like sat back in the cut and was very sarcastic. I always said she could have been like the Italian Joan Rivers. But that wasn't on trend for Italian women in the 1950s, right? They got married, they had kids, they regretted it. Just kidding. Well, some of them did, and my grandmother was really funny. And she had, even before she had started showing signs of dementia, she would just say things and I would go, these are like not the typical Hallmark moments you think you're having with your grandmother. Like you picture grandmas, especially Italian grandmas, you picture them in the kitchen or knitting or baking. And she was sharp. She was beautiful. She was so beautiful. Really, at her wake, I had all these pictures of her. I framed them in beautiful frames. She was gorgeous. And but she had a mouth on her, which I've inherited, as many of you know, especially if you've seen me live. And she would say things that were so wild to me. I'll never forget this one time. I was, dating and single and young, right? Your grandparents are never going to approve. Nobody's ever going to be good enough. And I was dating, I guess, a string of fellas. I feel like that's how she would say it. A string of fellas that she felt all looked alike or all had this one quality. And she came into my kitchen. We lived next door. That's how most ethnic families did. And she came into my apartment and she said, I think you're obsessed with sex. Now, guys, I could assure you I gave this woman no reason to believe that. And I was like, what? And she said, all the guys you date have a bald head. And I think that their heads remind you of penises. And this is why you date them. Because you're obsessed with sex. And I was like, wow, that is some angle she took. And a part of me just felt like she wanted to complain about the guys that I was dating. That was her way of subtly, not subtly telling me that she doesn't think any of them are good looking. And she said, your grandfather says, I guess our granddaughter doesn't own a mirror. Now, let me tell you something. My grandfather would never say a bad word about me. That was just her, again, throwing a dig in me because she wanted me to know that she didn't think the guys I was dating was good looking. One time I brought home a guy, which I never should have done. It was not somebody I was serious about. Like, just from the look of him, like, by looking at him, you knew he had no checking account. Like, that was the level of the guy I was dating. And she walked over to me and whispers in my ear, I hope you're just using him for the bedroom. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, first of all, yes, but ew, grandma, like, please, this isn't the conversation I want to have with you. And it was that, like, fiery personality that, don't get me wrong, sometimes I would be like, oh, why can't I just have a regular grandma who's kind and nice and says nice things? She wasn't that. But God damn it, if she didn't give me reasons to laugh. We told so many stories about her in the limo or the car service that we had on the way. This sounds so morbid, but on the way to the burial, that the driver was like laughing so hard. And I think we have to, like, I was so grateful in those moments that I had that sense of humor. Like, seriously, even to tell these stories and to tell them on stage and to tell them on the podcast, like, there's an art form to it, right? And she gave me the material and I just have to be able to deliver it now. And I feel really grateful to her for it. And I'm going to share with you the story I recently told. So if you come see me, you're going to hear this story. But it was just so funny. And I will say this. I didn't want to have a sad podcast today. But you know that sometimes I think of things and I feel like maybe you guys can relate or need to hear it. If you have ever taken care of anybody with dementia, you know that you kind of have to learn to love a whole new person, right? It's this person they become. And if you don't laugh, you will cry. My father's father had dementia and it was cruel. It was so cruel. He literally told me I had a great ass when I went to visit him in the nursing home. And I was like, I'm Santo's daughter. Like, do you know? And he was like, yeah. You have a great ass. And that my father couldn't shake that. He's like, your grandfather would never. He would kill anybody who spoke to you vulgar. And my father had such a hard time with it. And to me and my cousin, who was my age, we were cracking up, right? Because we were teenagers and we were like, yo, this is crazy. This is insane. This is so funny. Oh my God. Do you know what grandpa said to Tara? And we got more of a kick out of it because I was young and I really didn't realize, how hurtful it really was to my dad. And I guess I wasn't as close to his father as I was to that, and then my mother's mother. And then when it started happening with her, I was like, oh, this is actually awful. And I'll never forget, my grandmother had fallen and she had broken her hip. And I was in the hospital with her. It had happened late at night and my mother had spent the whole overnight at the hospital with her. And I went to relieve my mom and I said, you go home, get some rest, take a shower. I'll stay with her because her surgery was supposed to happen that morning. I said, I got this. I was the only grandchild, so we really were close. And being the only grandchild in an Italian family is very rare. And the nurse came in and she told me that my grandmother's surgery was going to be moved. It was being moved. And I said, oh no. And it was kind of later in the day at this point. I had now been there all day and they hadn't had her surgery. And they said they were going to move it to the morning. And now that's going to be like a day and a half. And I said, do me a favor. I said, before I leave this hospital tonight, I said, please don't sedate my grandmother anymore. You know, she's been here since late last night. And I want her to get her meds. I wanted to wake up. I wanted to eat something. She would get something called sundown syndrome, which meant she got very aggressive at night. And the nurse, I was in Cawfee Hospital in the Bronx, and the nurse left and she never came back. And my grandmother woke up and she was getting very agitated, and she was saying things that were kind of hurting my feelings. I guess the same way my dad had felt, like she was telling me I was a bad girl and she was going to tell my mother on me. And, you know, guys, when you've been in a hospital for a really long time and your grandmother's talking to you, not knowing where she is or really who you are or what age you are, that's really, it's really hard to deal with in the moment. And what could ever be funny in that moment, right? And so I'm getting so upset that I'm like calling for the nurse, and then I'm going to the front desk. And I'm like, can somebody help me? Can somebody help me get me meds? Like I need for this to stop. I need to stop her pain, but I also need to stop my own pain. And nobody helped me in this hospital. You got to be such an advocate, guys. I started screaming on the top of my lungs in hysteria because I was so fed up that all of a sudden everybody came. Nurses, doctors, security. I don't know who ran to that room, but it was definitely a couple people. And I ran to my grandmother, and one of the doctors met me there. And I got really upset at him because he was like, we need a sedation. Because my grandmother started getting aggressive. And I was like, no, we don't. She just needed her meds. And I'm like, let me explain to her what's happening. Again, I got defensive over, and I said, Grandma, you fell, you broke your hip. This is the doctor. He's going to explain to you what's happening. And she just took one look at him, guys. And she was like, doctor, you're just sleeping with her. And I was like, oh my God, like, Grandma, no, like, this is, no. And I felt mortified. I was like overcome with emotion, right? And he starts talking again, and she just goes, shh, and don't feel special. She sleeps with everyone. And guys, in the moment, I was sobbing uncontrollably, just like at my wit's end. I'm sure it was lack of sleep. I'm sure there were so many other factors that played into it, but it just was one of those moments. And the nurses had come over to me, and they're like, honey, you have to understand something with this disease. She doesn't really know what she's saying. But then I kind of just picked my head up and smiled, and I was like, nah, Grandma's back. Grandma's back, even if it's just for this moment. And I was embarrassed, but at the same time, I knew she was kind of breaking my balls. And it was just one of those moments where I said, I have to find the comedy in this. And I have to go home, and I have to tell my mother and my aunt, and we have to laugh about this, because that is what life is about. It is always going to be the best and worst of times, guys. We've all hit that age now where we're either taking care of our kids or taking care of our parents or still trying to take care of ourselves. And it's not always going to be, even when things are really good, there are going to be things that are happening around us or to people we love that are not good. And it's just kind of finding those moments of clarity and comedy. And so I share those stories with you to let you know that there's a bright side of almost anything. And that is what this Cawfee Talk is about. And if you come to a show, which you better come to a show. If you're listening to this podcast, you better be coming to shows. All my shows are listed at TaraJokes.com. I got Philly, I got Boston, I got Rhode Island finally, Jersey, Montreal, Toronto, Denver, just added Denver, Utah. Guys, who's coming to see me in Utah? I feel like that's not my audience, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do that story for a few people and some Mormons, and I'm going to be in Vegas June 5th, guys. The shows are on my website. My coffee mugs are on my website if you want a Cawfee Talk mug. People brought their Cawfee Talk mugs to Tampa, and I signed them. Shout out. Thank you, Jimmy, for bringing your mug. And that's it. I hope you guys have a great day. I hope you got something from this podcast. Listen, I always say this. If this resonated with you, beautiful. If it didn't, but you think it could resonate with somebody else, please share it. I love you guys. Have a great day. Cawfee Talk.